What's up, guys? Today we are talking epoxy floors. Now I am in my new two-story shop. Most of you guys have seen already. I moved into a new house with a huge two-story shop and I'm super excited. If you can see behind me, I've already started painting the wall, getting all my stuff in. The shop is full of all of my things right now, so craziness happening. But today we are talking about the epoxy floors that I got laid last week. So first, I just want to walk you guys through the process of my epoxy floors being laid, just to give you a little insider info on how it was done. I had my floors done by Mr. Epoxy. He's done 2 of my garage floors already, and I absolutely loved it, loved how it came out. So when he first saw my floor, he noticed that there was a layer that was on top of it. It wasn't epoxy, but it kind of looked more like paint or something that you'd kind of buy from the hardware store, that kind of box kit stuff. So he did tell me that it would cost extra because he would need to grind off the top layer. Now, he did give me an option to not grind off the top layer for it to be cheaper, but he informed me that if whatever was underneath the epoxy failed, then the epoxy would eventually fail in the future. So I decided for him to go ahead and grind it off, start from scratch, so that I could have new floors. Now, obviously grinding off that top layer was the most labor intensive part, but once that was done, he took his pressure washer to pressure wash the floor to get any other gunk off, off the floor, to make sure it was nice and clean, to do the etching and all of that. Once he did that, he made sure it was nice and dry and was ready to lay epoxy. Now, he told me once he laid the epoxy, he had about 45 minutes to lay it all before it actually started curing. And this part went really fast. It seemed like once he put it down, in less than an hour, he had it all spread out. And like I said, once the grinding and all that labor extensive stuff was done, the laying of the epoxy part went really fast. Now, this part was the most fun part. When I shared this on Instagram, it seemed like everyone loved this part. This was the laying of the flakes. Now, I told my epoxy guy that I didn't want a lot of flakes. I kind of like when the flakes are kind of sparsed out a little bit, but I just loved how he laid the flakes, throwing them up in the air and just letting them fall. He did an awesome job, and I love how it turned out. So one of the main questions was, what is the benefit of having epoxy floors? Obviously the look of it, because it looks amazing, but some of the other pros to epoxy floors is the durability. Epoxy makes the concrete that much stronger. I also love that anything that I spill on this floor wipes right up. I've spilled oil, paint, I spray painted the floor before and left it for about 2 weeks, and it just wipes right up. I can't talk. Okay, next, would I recommend doing it yourself? Now, for me, I feel like this is a job that should be left to a professional. I do all things DIY, and I probably could do this job if I tried, but I knew that this Mr. Epoxy guy is amazing at what he does, and he's a professional, so why not get a professional to do it? Now, you're probably thinking, well, what does it cost? For this job, I am leaving the price right here so you can see. I will note that my price was a lot higher because he did have to grind off the top layer on my floor. So if you have a clean garage that doesn't have a top layer, it will be a lot less. And the price for him to grind off the top layer was around $1 and some change per square foot. So a good portion of that price was to grind off the layers. Are the flakes just for looks? So talking with my epoxy guy, he let me know that the flakes do add some slip resistant to the floor. So obviously adding a little more flakes will add a little more slip resistant. He said maybe about 10%. I did light flakes, so my floor is probably a little more slick than others. That was another question that I got. Is it slick? The floor is a little bit slick. When it is wet, it's very slick. So I would just say be mindful if the floor is wet, stepping on it. But for the most part, I think it's okay as far as just walking on it regularly. It's not so slick where you're just gonna, slip and fall, but it does have some slickness to it, especially mine because I have less flakes. How long does it take to cure? So my epoxy guy was able to knock out my floor in 2 days. Like I mentioned before, the first day he took off the top layer. He pressure washed the floor, laid the original epoxy, and then came back the next day, took about an hour to put the sealing over it. And the next day after that, my floor was ready. So I would say, you know, put aside maybe 2 days for the whole process and your floor will be ready to go. So the epoxy that my guy used on the floor is not the epoxy that you can just get in a kit at the hardware store. This stuff is a lot stronger, a lot more durable. He let me know that he gets this epoxy from National Polymers, a really good epoxy company. You actually can't just go and buy it if you're just a regular consumer. You have to be a business to get it. So I know that it's good stuff. And the guy who did my floor, he let me know that those hardware kits is just a lot less durable than this. So that's another reason why I just wanted to get a professional, because he has access to the good material that I would want to use if I did it. If I wanted to do a DIY, I would want to use the good stuff, and I don't really have access to it. So that's kind of another reason why I just called in the professional. As far as the life expectancy of the floor, my epoxy guy gives a 3-year warranty, but the National Polymer has a 5-year warranty on their product. But my epoxy guy says he's seen floors last up to 10 years or more, depending on just how much wear or tear you put on the floor. So if you're always banging on the floor and putting heavy material, obviously it's not gonna last as long. For me, I probably don't have to worry about that. So my floor will probably last for a long time. But I will keep you guys updated as I go along, do things in the shop, and let you guys know how the floors are holding up. Another cool thing that everyone mentioned was the shoes that my epoxy guy was wearing. Obviously you can see that he's walking on the floor and it's not messing up anything. These are special shoes that they make for people who lay epoxy. And if you want to check those out, I'll try and leave a link below to some of those. If you want to DIY yourself and you need some, you can go get those. Does it smell? Now, when he laid it, obviously it did have, you know, a little bit of a strong smell because it is epoxy. But once it's dry and the floor is done, there is no smell. It's just like a regular floor. So no worries there. And as far as maintenance, there is no special rules really. It's kind of what you would do to take care of a normal concrete floor, but much easier. It's definitely a lot easier to sweep and maintain, which is really good. But in 2 years of having epoxy floors, I've never done anything special to clean it or anything like that. Just making sure it's swept and wiped up, and that's it. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video about epoxy floors, and I hope I answered all your questions. If I didn't, make sure you leave those questions below in the comment section, and I'll be sure to answer anything that you have questions about. All right, guys, later.